You're listening to The White Rabbit, conversations on the art of presenting in a rather noisy world. Your hosts are Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. Matt helps leaders of international companies speak, write, and present with confidence. Alper is a communications trainer and a startup investor with a diverse portfolio of companies in Barcelona. If you like this podcast, please share it with friends and colleagues. Now, on to Matt and Alper for today's conversation.
Alper, today we are going to talk about tackling resistance. And we're going to start out with general experience with resistance. And then we're going to get more specific. Since this is a presentation podcast, we'll be getting more specific with tackling resistance as it applies to rehearsing presentations, rehearsing speeches, stuff like that. And you also mentioned before the podcast that you had some actionable tips on how to overcome resistance. Is that correct?
Yeah, things that I came up with because I needed to.
And also, you have an interesting personal experience with overcoming resistance, because you've mentioned before resistance in you recording videos for your business, and you record videos all the time now. So somehow you managed to overcome that resistance. And I've always thought that was fascinating. Are you going to talk about that a little bit today too?
Well, in the intro, I can mention several points about that. Completely having overcome that would be an overstatement. I wish it were the case, but I have batches of video creation and then batches of like falling down and then picking myself up. So it's a roller coaster. It's like a roller coaster, right? It hasn't been completely fixed, and I have made my peace with the fact that it may never be completely fixed. It may never be something of the past, but like many things, like many challenges in life, you learn to live with them and they lose their grip on you with each time.
I think that hearing about the work in progress is going to be even more fascinating than the story of somebody who has already gone through it and is on the other side. So I'm looking forward to this. So where should we start? Tell me what's on your mind.
Well, in my case, like you mentioned, my resistance was towards creating videos, and there were so many reasons behind that. But one thing that was guiding me throughout all this time was my intrinsic belief, my intrinsic conviction that this was necessary. So I did the work, I did the research, and I looked into why this was happening and what I could do about that. And today I'm going to share some of the things that I did that worked for myself, and I believe that will work for other people as well.
Okay.
But then I realized, hey, we can also take this approach and apply to rehearsing presentations as well, because so many times I hear from people I work with that rehearsing the presentation is not something they look forward to. It's not something that they put on their calendar with joy and look for the day and cannot wait for the time that they're going to start working on it. So it has some resemblance and similarities with my process of creating the videos. I mean, that's not something that I look forward to. I'm more on the camp of, okay, this is something that I need to do at the moment. So I think the things that worked for me can be applied to tackling any resistance or procrastination towards rehearsing for the presentations as well.
Okay, keep going.
So in my case, my biggest realization was, okay, I am resisting.
Okay.
I mean, it may sound counterintuitive, but I also realized it's like something lurking in the back of your mind, and you create all sorts of other activities that would keep you from starting to work on the task at hand.
Okay.
And I think the most important point was actually realizing that you were showing some sort of resistance. So if you find yourself with an important presentation with a set date on your agenda, I think And also if you find yourself not starting the necessary work for preparing for that, I think it may be important to look into yourself and see if you're actually resisting it.
Okay.
I think that's like the first step, because rehearsal is essential. I mean, we have talked about this so many times. It's critical. It's essential. So if there is any resistance or any procrastination attempt against starting that, I think it's important to identify and realize that you're actually performing some resistance.
So let me see if I'm understanding you correctly. So one of the first steps of overcoming the resistance is to recognize that you are resisting. Is that correct?
Well, I wouldn't say the first step, but it's important to realize, because I believe you cannot work on something that you don't realize.
Okay.
So if you find yourself pushing the date away, pushing the starting date, of course, you probably wouldn't be able to push the presentation date. But if you find yourself procrastinating, if you find yourself resisting, I think it's important to realize actively that, or consciously, not actively, to realize consciously that you're doing this. Mm-hmm. And then I would say the first important step would be actually to identify the root cause of your resistance. Okay. I mean, in my case, I had to try to understand what was causing it. Mm-hmm. I had to look into myself. I had to ask questions like, am I feeling overwhelmed by the process? Mm-hmm. Or did I need help? Or was I not certain about where to begin, where to start? And after answering these questions, I was able to identify some causes. Mm-hmm. And only then I was able to actually take steps to address it. So my first step had nothing to do, in the case of recording videos, had nothing to do with the setup, with technical details, the sound, the picture. It was completely psychological, and it was important for me to look at the root cause of my resistance. Okay. Only then I was able to work on it. Okay. So in the case of the rehearsal for the presentations, I'm assuming that some of the root causes could be, you might have doubts about your upcoming performance. You might have fears about not looking good enough, being criticized, anything. I mean, it usually has nothing to do with the task at hand itself. It usually has nothing to do with the content, with your slides, with the way you're going to perform. But it's more like a personal fear or doubt about like performing well, or being criticized.
I have a question for you at this point. You mentioned the setup, and the setup I find personally, and I know a lot of people do, that they get hung up on the setup details, and so they use that as an excuse to delay the start,
guilty as charged.
Yeah, and so there are a couple schools of thought about that. One is the school of thought that I've got to be perfect, or I need to be really good before I can get started. And then another school of thought is just start, even if you're not particularly good, just get started anyway. Anything is better than nothing. What are your thoughts on that?
Exactly. Well, I suffered from I was a member of the first school. Mm-hmm. Like, I have to be perfect. It has to be perfect. I need the best lights. I need the best camera. I need the best setup, the software and everything. And I got some of those things. I basically turned one of my rooms into a professional studio. Mm-hmm. And then I didn't hit the record for months. Okay. So I was a part of that first school. Uh-huh. But now I would like to think that I have left behind. Okay. And now I think, you know what? Any video is better than no video, or any content is better than no content. Mm-hmm. And there is a huge difference between not having recorded anything and having something in your hands that you can work with. Okay. But in terms of the setup, in terms of the video recording setup, my biggest breakthrough was realizing that the most important aspect of a video is not actually the light, it's not the camera, it's not how you look on camera, it's actually the sound. So really? I had to invest. Yeah, I mean, I have noticed that in myself when watching other people's videos, watching other people's content, contrary to what may be the automatic feeling about the video, okay, I need to look good, I need to have the light in a good way. I mean, those are important things, but I think the most important aspect of any video is actually how you sound, the way people hear you.
Okay.
So yeah, that was one of the things that made me that enabled me to cross from the first camp, from needing to be perfect, to the second camp actually.
Okay.
Yeah. And how can that apply to preparing for the presentations? Maybe you may be thinking that, okay, I'm going to do this presentation and it has to be perfect. My content has to be perfect. My slides need to be perfect. My delivery has to be stellar. No, it doesn't have to be. I mean, I'm not saying that just put yourself in that situation and try to wing it. I'm definitely not saying that. But I would like to strongly emphasize that it doesn't need to be perfect. Just start doing the work and just try your best. Another thing that worked for me was actually setting a goal. So I set clear, and I actually made a clear and specific plan for my video production, and I made myself a promise of publishing one video per week for 2 months. So I ended up actually feeling pretty responsible and accountable towards myself for creating at least 8 videos. And surprisingly enough, it took me years to produce the first video and only 2 weeks to produce the next.
Did you just say years to produce the first video?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Huh.
Yeah.
And then just, you said also just weeks to produce the second video?
2 weeks.
Really?
2 weeks.
Wow.
It was like floodgates were open.
Yeah.
I just found myself more comfortable.
I'll say.
And yeah. So setting a goal in my case worked. So again, if you're preparing for a presentation, I mean, starting in advance is a good idea. So if you have 3 weeks, let's say, for an upcoming important meeting, in which you're going to present, set a goal. I mean, you can say something like, okay, I have 3 weeks. I'm going to use 2 weeks out of that to work on my content, to work on my delivery skills, to work maybe on my slides, but set a goal. I think in my case, that was important.
Okay.
But speaking of setting goals, I think it's also important to break them into smaller steps. So if you were to say, okay, I have a presentation in 3 weeks, so I'm going to dedicate 1 day to work on every single part of that presentation, I think it won't be manageable. I don't think it would be realistic, because what if something happens during that day that needs your attention elsewhere? So you're divided, you're not focused. So I think it's important to plan in advance and maybe break down the goal into smaller steps, so that if something goes wrong during the day, you can just accomplish at least something and still have time to work on other parts of the goal.
Okay, good idea.
And what I did was I also created a schedule. So I created a schedule to work on each step of the process. For example, in my case, recording videos not only required actually recording them, but it required like planning for them, scripting them, so also editing, post-production after that. So I created a schedule in which I had set days for recording them, having the raw recordings in my hands, and then and working on them to produce. And before actually like planning, okay, today I'm going to talk about this, next day I'm going to talk about that, etc.
Okay.
And I held myself accountable, which was one of the steps that worked for me.
Oh yeah.
I held myself accountable for actually sticking to the schedule. No one knew about this. No, I hadn't declared it or published it anywhere else. But telling myself and putting signs on the wall, for example, actually helped me. And that's actually how it worked for me, in the sense that it took me years to produce the first one, but 2 weeks to produce the next 7 ones.
And by the way, a question for you.
Go ahead.
When you mention signs on the wall, are you just talking about like you take a piece of paper and handwrite, "Hey, make a video" or something like that?
No, it was more like I printed the calendar, and I was able to see that the red zone is approaching. For example, I would print a calendar and say, okay, Thursdays are video production. And I would see that the Thursday was coming, and I would not set meetings for that day. I would disable my automatic calendar link for Thursday, and I would focus on that. So
okay,
I wouldn't put anything else on that day until the production was finished. So that's how I held myself accountable.
Sure.
And the last was I would call it my personal secret sauce. Was, again, nobody knew about it, but I kind of celebrated my success. I mean, it was a huge deal for me to publish videos, and I would recommend this to anyone who has a daunting task ahead of them, or which they perceive as daunting. When you finish it, I mean, let's say you have this presentation coming up in 2 weeks, and in these 2 weeks, when you put enough work, when you put enough dedication into it, celebrate it. I mean, I don't mean like go out and party like crazy, but in my case, for example, I will be out on a dinner date with my girlfriend or with my friends, and I would raise a toast silently to myself. I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't mention anything. But one of those toasts would be like a self pat on the back for having accomplished that.
Okay.
I mean, like Neil Armstrong had said, it was just the opposite. I mean, it was a very small step. It was a completely insignificant step for humankind, but it was a huge step for me personally.
Yeah.
So I would take a moment to acknowledge that and reward myself for what I deemed as one of the most difficult tasks in the world. So I think celebrating your success is an important part of that.
Yeah, definitely. I find that too for myself. So
yeah, those are the steps that I came up with something that I was showing sheer resistance towards. And if you're feeling the same towards preparing for presentations, you can take some of them, all of them, and try to see how they work out for you.
Yeah, I remember your progress in that area is remarkable. I remember when, some years ago, when somebody would turn the camera on you, you'd be like, you'd freeze up. All of a sudden, this guy who's like outgoing and, loves public speaking and stuff, all of a sudden he completely freezes up. And now today you're like Mr. Video. And so
Matt, I have actual footage of myself looking into the camera for 7 minutes, not being able to utter a single word.
Wow, that's
no one's going to see that, by the way.
Yeah, that's almost
I'm not
scary.
Going to
okay, yeah, that's good to know, but I totally don't want to see that. That's almost scary to know that exists.
Yeah, because that was the part where I was holding myself accountable, and I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to push the record now, and I'm not going to move from this chair. I'm not going to stop recording until I have something on my hands. And it took me 7 minutes to being able to start speaking.
That's amazing. So we're about out of time for today. So thank you very much, Alper. And this overcoming the resistance or tackling resistance, it's something that we all experience. I experience it in my work. You've just described how you've experienced it, and pretty much everybody else in the world experiences it. And the thing about resistance is that a lot of us think that we're the only ones experiencing it, and every single person, I have never met anybody who doesn't experience it. So thank you very much for sharing your story, Alper.
Thank you. I'll talk to you. Thank you for listening to The White Rabbit with Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or through your favorite feed.